Because it is the nature of human beings, the 20th century is a series of events of people and countries wanting to take control. It is also a series of inventions. In 1904, the Wright brothers accomplished the first flight. On September 10th, they flew the flyer for 12 seconds over 120 feet in North Carolina. This set the new era of the skies. In 1904, wars started to take place. First, the Russo-Japanese War took place. After Russia was defeated, the people felt angry and started some strikes against their own government. After the war, Bloody Sunday came in Russia. It was just a peaceful uprising which turned into a massacre because soldiers started firing. In 1905, after the Bloody Sunday, Nicholas knew he had to compensate, so he created the Dumas, which lowered the taxes and earned him the trust of the people. Because Japan won the war against Russia, they felt superior, so in 1905 they surrounded Korea and took away its freedom. 4 years later, because of the repression Japan had made Korea undergo, a nationalistic Korean killed Hirobumi, the Japanese leader. Meanwhile, in Portugal, the Portuguese Revolution started. It deposed the constitutional monarchy and established a republican regime. In Mexico, the Mexican fight for revolution started after years of total control. Porfirio Diaz was found to be the cause of the conflict. In 1911, Porfirio left the throne and went to France. Between 1912 and 1913, the Balkan Wars took place. It was a conflict over territory of the Ottoman Empire. 1 year later, after he made the San Luis Plan and overthrew Diaz, Francisco Madero introduced land and labor reforms as president. While Mexico was going through the revolution, in 1914 in Europe, the World War I was triggered by the assassination of the Austrian Herr. While Europe was going through a war crisis, in Asia, anti-monarchy war took place. It was a war in China because Yuan proclaimed himself emperor. World War I was a conflict over territory. The USA did not want to enter the conflict, but they did in 1917 in the Allied side. Almost 1 year after the USA entered the war, Germany surrendered and the Versailles Treaty was signed. About a decade after the Japanese took control of the Koreans made some movements against the Japanese. The Mexican Revolution was a non-ending story of people taking over the throne. First came Madero, then Huerta, then Carranza, then Adolfo Huerta, then Obregón, and then Elias Calles. During Calles' term, the Cristero Wars took place. It was a persecution to members of the Catholic Church. Followers decided to make an armed movement in response. Just before the Great Depression, a worldwide economic crisis, there was the Wall Street crash. It was caused mainly by speculation. In 1936, after the Great Depression ended, Germany started disobeying the Versailles Treaty. They were tired of paying their debt, and they wanted more territory.
The Japanese felt just like the Germans. They wanted more territory, so they formed an alliance with the Nazis in 1936. Japan was and still is an island with scarce resources, which they needed in 1937 for the industry, so they attacked China. While there was a war inside China to decide what kind of government was better, communist or socialist, these parties stopped fighting each other and faced the Japanese. At this time there was a war created in Europe and worse in Asia, but in Mexico in 1938, Cárdenas expropriated the oil. He said that all found in Mexican soil was for the Mexicans. Among other things, he returned lands to peasants. Germany signed the Versailles Treaty where they agreed not to attack anymore and to pay money for the destructions. Hitler decided to disobey, and in 1939 tensions were high enough that the British President Chamberlain declared war on Germany after they attacked Poland. Just like Japan and Germany, Italy wanted more territory. Benito Mussolini entered the war in Germany's side, but left later. One of the most famous events of World War II took place in 1941. It was the attack on the American Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Roosevelt, who among other things gave the USA economic stability, declared war on the Axis powers. The Axis powers looked like they were a lot, but Mexico joined in 1932 with the USA. Ávila Camacho, who created El Seguro Social, made the decision. Economic aid was received by Mexico. During World War II towards the end, Hitler knew that he could be captured, so he ended his life in 1945. He led the Nazis and is responsible for countless atrocities, like killing millions of Jews. In the same year the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened. It was the response of the USA to the attack on Pearl Harbor. The bombs were developed by the world-known scientist Albert Einstein who received some prizes for various works. After almost 1 month after the bombings, the war ended. Germany lost and was now under power of the USSR, USA, Great Britain, and France. This created another tense period of time. In the Potsdam Conference in 1936, American Truman and Russian Stalin agreed that Germany would return to the size it was in 1937. After Mussolini left the power, Italy became a republic as a result of a referendum. Meanwhile, in 1947, India became independent. Nehru negotiated independence and also made economic and political reforms that shaped the country. Gandhi was also a crucial leader in accomplishing this, who made peaceful demonstrations. In 1949, after being attacked by the Japanese and having a revolution, Mao Zedong proclaimed the Republic of China, which meant the communists won. Because Germany was divided in 4 sides, USA, USSR, Great Britain and France, there were different ideas, especially because the USSR was a communist country. In 1961, the Berlin Wall was built to divide the socialists from the communists. In American ground, the USA had gone through a crisis of discrimination. Luther King made many movements to end segregation. His most famous speech was "I Have a Dream." In 1968, he was murdered by a white racist. Not only in the USA was there a social crisis, but also in Mexico. During 1968, the Tlatelolco massacre took place. It was the killing of hundreds of protesting students mad with the government due to few freedoms.
They were asking for more and better schools and support from the government.
Aeroplanes were not enough. In 1969, Neil Armstrong was the first man to set foot on the moon. From 1970 to 1973, a list of gadgets were introduced, such like floppy disks, calculators, VCRs, etc. Following the Cold War and nations wanting allies, in 1975, South Vietnam fell to communist forces. This war was fought between North and South Vietnam, whose ally was the US. In 1976, Communist Cuba and Russia installed a communist government in Angola, while Mexico was rejoicing because a huge reserve of oil was found. After the expropriation, oil was sold and Mexico benefited. This meant economic income. Later, in 1979, Russia invaded Afghanistan with the same purpose, to establish communism. Great Britain invaded the Falkland Islands in 1982. The territory was also desired by Argentina. Great Britain won the war. Meanwhile, in 1983, the USA invaded Grenada, an island with the same old objective. 2 years later, for the sake of the world, in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev won the elections of Russia's presidency. To begin with, he allowed more freedoms than all previous presidents. He had a more open mind and established better relations with foreign countries. On the other side, one of the most devastating atrocities took place in Mexico City in 1985, an earthquake that killed more than 5,000 people. The Cold War was a rivalry of government ideals and threats of nuclear attacks. Both the US and USSR possessed these weapons. Some conflicts were caused by the explosion of bombs. In 1986, there was a disaster in Chernobyl. A Russian nuclear plant exploded in Ukraine. This is in part why Mikhail decided to put an end to the conflict. Like I said before, Mikhail's reforms of openness contributed to end the war. In 1989, the Berlin Wall was taken down due to a pledge made by American President Ronald Reagan, who said, "Mikhail, if you really want to end the war, tear this wall down." And so Mikhail did. Months later, Germany was reunified. A year later, in 1991, the USSR was dissolved. A document was signed regarding the establishment of independent states. Russia started making peace relations with China, for example, in 1992. Following this, a civil war was started in Yugoslavia, and it split into 5 countries during 1992. In 1994, a very important event was the assassination of Donaldo Colosio. He was running for the presidency, but the opposer, Ernesto Zedillo, ordered his murder. Zedillo was with the PRI party, the same party in which Elias Calles was during the Cristero War.
We can say that the 20th century were 100 years of symbolic reconstruction and literal destruction. Among these 100 years, most nations found stability and chose the type of government they wanted. A very important period of time. Without it, the world would probably be in a worse crisis than it is today.